Welcome to today's webinar on hacking an Oracle database and how to prevent it. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrigy, and I'll be monitoring this e-learning session. Speaking today is Stephen Coast. Steve is the Chief Technology Officer and founder of Integrigy Corporation. He's been working with Oracle products since 1994, and for the last 17 years, Steve has been focused on the security and auditing aspects of the Oracle Business Suite and the Oracle databases, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences, including OAUG, IOUG, and the National Collaborative Conferences coming up in April this year. Now I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. So today's topic is, when we look at an Oracle database, how do you properly secure it against an attack? And in order to properly secure an Oracle database against an attack, you really have to understand what is an attack? How is someone going to actually come after your Oracle databases? And what steps are they going to take? So this presentation is actually the result of multiple incident investigations performed by Integrigy for a number of our clients. And so what we've done is kind of boiled down and taken those incidents and said, okay, what was common to them? What really happened internally in the organization that allowed someone to actually hack into one or more of their Oracle databases? And so what we're going to do is walk through the process that we discovered and saw an attacker take and what steps they use to actually get into Oracle databases within clients. And so we'll systematically walk through that and actually show you the tools, and then we'll finally wrap up and talk about how to actually prevent these. What are some of the steps you need to be taking? And some of them are obvious steps that you need to be changing passwords, applying security patches, but we'll actually walk through those and show you why those steps are important throughout this presentation. So before we get started, a quick intro about Integrigy for those of you not familiar with us. Integrigy was founded in 2001 by former Big Six consultants working on large ERP and database projects, and back then realized that security was not being handled by our clients. And so we founded Integrigy to help solve that gap of how do you actually secure your mission-critical applications and databases, be it Oracle Business Suite, PeopleSoft, Oracle Database, SQL Server, and secure it properly, effectively, and so you can also manage it and operate it effectively. So we've come from a background of a lot of DBAs internally, a lot of people who have actually been in your shoes and understand how to run these large mission-critical systems and how to properly secure them. Integrigy has two sides to our business. We have a set of products that help you secure Oracle Business Suite, Oracle databases. And the first is AppSentry, which is an ERP application and database security auditing tool. So AppSentry will go through and make sure that things are done appropriately. Some of this presentation will revolve around AppSentry, what it can actually tell you that you need to secure in terms of configuration, patches, etc. For those on the webinar today who actually run Oracle Business Suite or PeopleSoft, we also provide a proactive layer of protection in our product called AppDefend, which is a web application firewall specifically designed for Oracle Business Suite and PeopleSoft. So if you're behind on applying critical patch updates, AppDefend is actually an interim solution for that. Or if you're actually a third-party support provider, AppDefend is providing virtual patching and can actually supplement applying Oracle critical patch updates. We have a services side to our business that is truly a world-class consulting firm, and we actually help many, many clients on how to actually secure these large applications. And this is really where the presentation came from today. So we're working both to help secure, do assessments, and actually do incident response for our clients. So how do you make sure that your environment is secure? How do you make sure you're compliant? We actually help a lot of clients who are going through PCI compliance, GDPR, and those types of things actually get through that compliance effort specifically to Oracle and Oracle Business Suite. And then finally, we help a lot of our clients implement security products such as Oracle Database Vault, Oracle Audit Vault, and Imperva Guardian. So how do you actually implement these products to make sure they fit within your security ecosystem and they actually work well with the Oracle Database, Oracle Business Suite, PeopleSoft? And both our products and services are backed up by a world-class research team. So we are actively working with Oracle to fix security bugs, notify them of security bugs. And if you've gone to our website, Integrigy.com, we have many, many white papers on there that we publish out a lot of our information for free. So how do you actually do this? Because securing these large databases and applications is not easy, and we're here to help you as much as possible. So that's enough about Integrigy. We'll kind of jump into the presentation here. So we'll start off with a little background, talking about why this is important, what are people after, why are databases being attacked. We'll talk about the targeted attack, what's actually happening, what steps are they going to take, and then we'll finish off and talk about preventative and detective controls on how do you actually secure your Oracle databases to prevent the attacks that we just talked about. So a little background. So a lot of this presentation today will be focused in on the external attacker, someone who's actually coming after your organization. They're looking for something, and the first question is, what are they looking for? What are they kind of come after you? Most often when we see an Oracle database hack, that is typically a targeted attack. It's not really a drive-by. It's not someone just saying, oh, let's just kind of see if we can find some Oracle databases. Typically what happens is they have actually gotten into your organization and now are looking for databases. They're looking for the critical data, and how can I actually come after that and do something in regard to that. So these targeted attacks can be from many different realms. It could be an advanced persistent threat. It could be state-sponsored. It could be some of the hacking organizations. It could be just a 15-year-old in their basement. One area where we've actually seen a big uptick recently is cryptocurrency mining. So Bitcoin and Monero. Monero is an anonymous currency, which is very easy. So people actually want your CPU cycles. They don't want your data as much anymore. They actually want your CPU cycles, so I can actually put an agent on your servers and then run cryptocurrency mining, then come back and grab the crypto coins that were mined and then sell them. So it's a very easy way to make money. So it's kind of an interesting tangent now that people aren't necessarily worried about your data. We've seen a couple cases where servers have been hacked and there's no indication that they actually looked at any data. They got in, they installed these crypto mining programs, ran them, used up your CPU cycles, grabbed the coins, and then went on their merry way. But generally, people are looking for data. They're looking for the sensitive data. They're looking for information that they can use to do things. So in terms of data, what are they looking for? Traditionally, it's credit cards, because if you are accepting credit cards, you have credit cards in your Oracle database, they can use that information and actually create new cards, go to Walmart, buy TVs, things like that. Another area that's taking off is identity theft and tax fraud. Tax fraud is, especially if I can get your social security number, a little bit of information about you, I can actually do fraudulent tax returns. Health insurance fraud, again, with the cost of health insurance today and medical treatment, if I can actually go in with your health insurance information and have an operation or do something like that, it's very beneficial. It's a $20,000, $30,000 potential gain. So again, these are real life dollars that people are looking for, and especially someone who can go in and steal 20,000, 30,000 people's information and then sell them off. You're talking about real money here at the end of the day. Healthcare is a huge area that we've seen actually a lot of breaches. So according to the Identity Theft Resource Center, 42% of breaches have recently been healthcare industry. So again, these are targeted attacks. They understand where the data is, and they're looking for different groups of data. And when we're starting to talk about now, what's it actually worth? What can I calculate out? So if I can get someone's first name and last name and social security number, I can actually sell that in bulk for $1 to $5. When I start getting more information like date of birth, I can now start a little bit more. And if I can now get a full HR record, typically, I can sell that for between $30 and $100 each. So if I can go in and steal 5,000, 10,000 records, even in a smaller organization that you may have 5,000 employees that may be your HR database, I can now start making some money. So when you start calculating this out, this becomes real money to somebody, especially if I'm living in Eastern Europe, if I'm living in Asia. You're maybe thinking, well, I'm not willing to do this because I live in the United States. I'm not going to do this type of attack. I'm not going to really spend this time and effort for $50,000. But when you start talking about doing this in a third world country, $50,000 is a lot of money. And now, potentially, I'm talking about $100,000, $200,000. So there is potentially a significant amount of money to be made from these types of hacks. An area that is actually hopefully getting better. This actually peaked in 2015 and 2016, and the IRS has spent a lot of time and effort in the last couple of years, but tax fraud is a significant challenge. Last tax season, the IRS paid out $4.4 billion in fraudulent tax returns. So again, when I'm starting to now look at your HR database, because I've got Social Security numbers, name, address, date of birth, I've got a lot of information. All I have to do, especially right now, is I can just go submit a fraudulent tax return to the IRS, put in a $4,000 refund, have it go to a bank account. There is not a lot of checks and balances today within the IRS. They are getting much better at it, and they're adding more in as time goes along. In the next couple of years, this will be actually protected somewhat, but it is very easy still today to actually just submit a tax return and get the IRS to go deposit money in the bank. And they're not doing checks on banks, so I can reuse the same bank account over and over and over. So this is a significant challenge. So if you're someone who's looking to do this, if I can go start submitting 10, 20, 30 tax returns with $3,000 or $4,000 each on refunds, that's real money. So this is, again, cases why people are coming after your data, what they're looking for. One thing we always like to do with clients is let's talk about database valuation. Can you put a dollar amount on each database you have? And this can go all the way from just simple credit cards to Social Security numbers. I can actually do very simple calculations because I know what the black market numbers are. If I'm talking about looking at your databases that may contain price lists, vendor information, bid information, that becomes a little bit more nebulous because we've actually worked with one client recently that we talked to them. They thought a database was compromised. They thought it was potentially a state-sponsored situation because they lost some recent bids, millions and millions of dollars in bids where they were consistently undercut by the same company, but undercut by about 5% each time. So it was actually kind of a strange situation that they were looking at. Did someone get our information? Is someone compromising this database that contains our confidential bid information that no one should know? And this company from overseas was consistently underbidding them on several projects. And they were pointing back to a single database that may be that. We were unable to determine if it was that at the end of the day, but most likely it was because they did not have auditing. They did not have the security measures in place that we could actually determine. And the reason we couldn't determine it was there was no audit trail. There was nothing that we could rely back on and say, yes, someone came in and accessed these records. So again, when we're looking at this, there's a lot of different aspects, but when someone gets in, you need to have those audit records to know. And this database evaluation will help you go through and say, okay, where is our important databases? What do we need to be thinking about? Which ones do we care about? Which ones don't we care about? And so it's very important to at least have that risk evaluation going in and understanding if something is going to happen, where is my biggest risk to my organization? Where should I at least start in this project? So that's kind of the background. That's what people are going after, why they're going after it. So there's lots of different reasons. But the primary thing for Oracle databases is it's typically a targeted attack. It's not someone's just going to hack in your organization and rummage around. They tend to go after, when we're talking about databases, more for they've identified you as potentially having what they want, and they're going to come after you. That's much harder to stop than just a drive-by where, okay, they found a weakness, they were able to get in. And so when we talk about a targeted attack, what's the process? What's going to happen here? How are they actually going to get into your organization? And fortunately for Oracle databases, these are on your internal network. These aren't hopefully not putting them on the internet. We actually find that occasionally. But generally, most organizations and companies, except for generally universities, are the one area that we see have Oracle databases on the internet. But it's in your internal perimeter. It's in behind your firewalls. So really the first point is they're going to have to breach your perimeter network. And so everything we're going to talk about today is the assumption is someone has breached your perimeter network, or potentially it's an insider. You may have a contractor who has some nefarious goals in mind and wants to make a little bit of money on the side because you're not paying him enough, those types of things. So again, the first point is that point of entry that they're going to get in, breach your internal network, and maybe through a phishing attack, etc. And they're going to establish a beachhead. They're going to do that compromise. They're going to get in, have a machine that they have control over. And then the next third step here is the lateral movement. They're going to start looking for what they want. They may have already thought about what they want. They may actually know what they want, or they're like, okay, we need to find the HR database, or we're just going to go find databases and get the information we want because we're just looking for things to sell. It may be a state-sponsored attack that they understand exactly that we need to get a database that has price lists, has supplier information, has bids, those types of things. So they're going to look for that information potentially. So in this presentation, where we're going to start is the attacker is in your network. They've established that beachhead. They are now looking around, and they know that they want to go after some Oracle databases. So what they're going to try to do is discover where those are, and there's a number of techniques they'll do. The key is, how can they do this without detection? How do they do it without you knowing? And then finally, how are they going to get this data out? They may be stealing a small amount of data, but they may be stealing gigabytes or terabytes of data. In a number of large breaches, people were actually stealing gigabytes of data, and gigabytes of data flowing out the network, and no one was watching for that. No one knew it was leaving. So again, how do you actually make sure that you're not seeing this leaving your network when there's large queries, those types of things? So the first step, if I'm going to hack into your Oracle databases, I need to find them on your network. So the assumption here, again, is I'm on your internal network, I've compromised that, and I need to now find out where is the Oracle data, where's things that I want to steal. And there's a couple of different ways I can do that, either passively or actively. And this is always interesting in our breach investigation, because typically an attacker doesn't know where the databases are. They have to track them. And we can actually typically find pretty good evidence of that searching. And it's either passively, so they're not going to go after the databases directly. They're not going to make noise. They're not going to try to raise any alarms on the network security side. What they're going to do is try to find other ways to get to those databases. And the key is, you've got a lot of internal information. You've got knowledge repositories. You've got code repositories. You've got search engines internally. And so a lot of times what they've done is actually compromised someone's machine. And then from that machine, they know that, hey, you've got an internal search engine. You've got SharePoint. You've got these internal tools that they can start using and actually look for Oracle. And so oftentimes we find, if we go to SharePoint, searches from that user's machine who is compromised for the word Oracle, tnsnames.ora, they're looking for that information. And if that doesn't work, then they kind of go to a more active approach. They go to network scanning. They're actually going through and looking for either DBA's machines then, or actually doing network scanning. That will actually be a fairly noisy activity, but a lot of organizations don't look for that, and there's a number of ways you can conceal that on the network. So the first thing is, a classic thing to look for is tnsnames.ora. And so we've seen in different cases where actually if you look in your internal search engines and look for the search terms, we actually see people looking for things like tnsnames.ora. We've actually been able to track that down in one case where they found tnsnames.ora, and that was the databases they went in. So every single database that was compromised was in the tnsnames.ora file that we're able to find. And so this is easy to do internally often. I'll jump out and do an example here. So in this case, what we'll do is actually just go to Google, and I'll actually put in, so here's the classic Google, and we're assuming this is just for demonstration purposes, but assuming this is your internal, you may be using the Google search appliance internally to actually do your internal searching. You may have SharePoint. But this is what someone's going to do, is they're going to look for, and I'll actually narrow the search down to just educational sites. So this is a lot of the major universities in the country. So again, when I'm doing this, things are popping up pretty quickly. So I'm actually searching for tnsnames.ora. And if I kind of click on one of these, this is just a tnsnames.ora.file out on the internet. And I won't try it this time because actually I did one presentation that actually we brought this up for a major university and actually said, oh, these people's databases would not be on the internet. And actually I was able to connect to it. I was able to get into a database by just doing this Google search, pulling up the tnsnames.ora file and actually connecting to their database. I'm like, oh, no way they would actually allow that or have that Oracle database hanging out on the internet with the tnsnames file out there. But we were able to connect to it. I won't do that here today because we kind of decided that wasn't a good idea anymore. But again, this is what somebody would do internally, and a lot of organizations keep master tnsnames.aura files out there. So again, protecting against this probably isn't that important because, again, you can find this information in a number of different ways, but this is what the attacker is going to do. And then now they have the master list of all your databases. They know where they are, and they're going to go do some of the other techniques I'll show you in a few minutes to connect to each of these. So that's kind of one of the first passive attempts, is looking to SharePoint, to your internal search engines, looking for where are all the Oracle databases. And we're seeing much more sophistication in people understanding that I'm going after Oracle databases. The NSA had some other hacking tools compromised, and they were actually hacking the SWIFT network, which is a financial transaction network. They went after the Oracle databases that were managing the SWIFT funds transfer network. So the NSA was actually using and attacking Oracle purposely because they understood that's where the data was, and that's what they did. So again, this is not science fiction. This is reality. This is what's happening. People understand when I'm going to go after an organization and I know most likely what I want is an Oracle database, they're going to specifically go after Oracle databases. This is just not a random situation. They're very targeted, very purposeful, very knowledgeable of what they're doing, and very kind of quiet and working their way through this. And they will actually use whatever tools they can do, and you have to be prepared and protect against all possible avenues. Another interesting one that we saw recently, and this was actually an internal breach, was actually an internal employee that was doing things, and the way they were able to get in was they actually went through the source code repositories and actually found a number of Oracle databases that had credentials in the code repository. So they had a number of custom applications internally. One of them had Social Security numbers in them, and the internal person was able to go in the code repository and get the credentials because they were hard-coded in source code. We often do this as part of our assessment procedure, and we find more often than not at least one or more database credentials in hard-coded files in the repository that work. Because again, people are writing these interfaces, they're actually doing the SQL scripts, they're hard-coding the password, that's going to the DBA is running these scripts and actually creating the accounts, and no one is then going back and changing the password. And as an example here, I'll kind of show you an example of using GitHub. So GitHub is an open source code repository out there, a lot of projects out there. And this is an example to demonstrate what you should be doing in your internal code repositories. So we'll jump out now to GitHub. And GitHub has a very powerful search feature. And I can actually go out and just type in alter user. And I will do identified by. And I'll put some quotes around it just to kind of optimize my search here. Got it right here. So alter user, identified by. Everyone's probably loving my typing capabilities today. And so when I find code, I have found now 20,000 hits on that phrase. As you can see, this is just now coming up with case after case where alter user, they're creating, this is kind of some of the standard Oracle internals, but again, creating the account Oracle OCM with the password Oracle. They're using the name password _2 as, and again, here's password 3, password without a D. Ooh, God, that's kind of tricky. And so again, multiple times one after another. This one's a little bit more secure because here they're using by value. So this one is actually a little bit better. So if you are hard coding in a script, they've actually generated the password, but actually are hard coding the hash. Therefore, I can't get back to the actual password here. So this would be a little bit better way to do it. We'd always recommend that you'd use bind variables and substitution here. So when the DBA does it, they're actually typing in the password. So in this case, this is the way to do it. In this case, when I run the script, it'll actually now prompt me for the password to put in versus hard coding it. Now let's kind of see if we find some other Any more interesting ones here? So again, this is as simple as I can go through your source code repository, and we find one or more of these in very often. So again, not a lot. Oh, this is a great password here, haha 3. Again, this is how easy to do. You'll find a number of these. Hopefully the passwords have been changed. Sometimes they're old passwords. You do have to test them, but more than often than not, you'll actually find a couple. So that's how easy it is. Again, some organizations open up the source code repository, so there's not a lot of security around it, so I actually can get into it. Other times I do need credentials. But this is just one example of what someone's actually going to do, is they're going to go through these types of processes to look for how do I actually get into and find the credentials without actually having to spend a lot of time and effort. Again, now I also probably have the information I need to connect to the database in those files. When I find that SQL script, oftentimes the IP address, port number, and SID is hard-coded in, as well as the credentials I need. So again, I'm set there. I'm in your database. Now I can start doing some things. Another interesting one that has happened recently was a Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliate was hacked. The only reason the DBA ever realized that they were actually hacked was that he was in the database and saw that he was already logged in. And I was like, I'm not logged in. His credentials were compromised. There's a number of ways to do that. A lot of people are moving to SQL Developer. And in SQL Developer, I can actually save my credentials so I don't have to retype my password in each time. Well, someone has actually written a little utility called Show Me Password in SQL Developer to actually pull out those passwords. So if we kind of go back out to SQL Developer, this is actually, we've seen this actually with a number of cases where developers and other people are going either to shared laptops or things like that to actually get this information because someone accidentally saves it out. In one case, we saw where the developers actually went into the DBA's machine because he walked away, and actually went in and were able to get the passwords off his machine because they needed them. That was kind of nefarious. There was a reprimand there for sure. But that was actually what we saw. They actually installed this utility on the DBA's machine and was able to get the passwords because they needed them. So again, in SQL Developer, there's no way to stop this. There's a Save Password button. So you can actually save the password within SQL Developer. If I install that utility and then just go under, it adds a menu option called Show Me Password, I can now pull up all the saved passwords for this instance of SQL Developer. So again, this is another way. So if I'm actually phishing attack, getting into someone's machine, they're using SQL Developer, I can now install this utility or just pull this file off the machine that's called connections.xml. I can pull this off and actually decrypt the passwords and then have the passwords. And typically, this is for DBA or privileged developers. For someone who actually typically has more privileges because they're using SQL Developer, they're doing direct database connections, this is actually a pretty powerful way to get in. So again, we're just kind of, these are some techniques that we've seen that has actually happened in the field that organizations have lost control and people are able to get in databases, and these were the techniques that they were able to use. So those are a few techniques with passive means to get accounts, connection information, and get into your databases. If that doesn't work, if they can't find information that way, then they have to resort to a little bit more proactive, active attack against the databases. And there's a number of tools out there. I'm going to focus on just one of them, but there's probably 4 or 5 very good tools, very easy to use tools that will now help me go find your databases and get into your databases. And the first one is a well-known network security tool called Nmap. Nmap is very famous for scanning networks. So we'll actually find open ports, and many security professionals use this all the time. We use this as part of our penetration tests. Actually go, when we're doing a penetration test on Oracle databases, we'll use this to scan the network. We do it very noisily, but we've never actually been told that we were detected or had our hands slapped. Because the key here is I can actually slow this down slow enough so it's not detected by many security tools. And also, the ports we're looking for in the Oracle world are a very narrow range. I'm not scanning for large numbers here, and most security tools are looking for large scans, that I'm scanning for thousands and thousands of addresses, large numbers. So typically a scan would be 50 or 60,000. what I can do in the Oracle world, traditionally, port 1521 is the default port. I can typically, before I run this type of scan, is figure out where your data center is. I can get down to a very limited set of IP addresses, and I'm probably going to only scan for port 1521 because that's the default. And I may do 1,000 or 2,000, and most security tools are not geared to see that low number and actually react to them. And then I can slow it down over time, so I actually can do this over a day or 2 days that no one would actually ever know, because it's a kind of slow trickle, very low number, and it avoids most security tools. And so here's the command line. Nmap is a free tool you can download so you can scan your own networks. And I actually went and did a couple scans here because these scans can take a couple minutes, so I wanted to kind of optimize this a little bit. So I'll actually bring up my scan here. And so this is the results of the scan. Again, this scan took about a minute to actually perform on a limited network, but I scanned our development network here within Integrigy, and kind of just to give you an example. So this is how it pulls up information. So again, it's looking at a limited set of ports, and it's now found on port 1521 on my machine 2.14. It went through and actually found it. And the nice thing about Nmap is actually now then does a service query and actually connects to the Oracle database and looks at the version number and tells me the version. So then now I can even target my attack even more, because now not only do I know where the databases are on the network, I actually know what versions they are. So this will help me because I know you have an 11.203 database here. 11.203 doesn't have security patches. So I know that database probably has a little bit less security on it. It won't be patched. It won't be up to date. Where if a 12.102 database may be a little bit more hardened. So I can now figure out which way do I want to go? What do I want to look at? I can also make some determinations here. Typically when we do this network scanning, if there's a single database per machine, that tends to be a production database server. This database server here has 3 databases. That tends to be a test and development. So by just having some understanding on how Oracle is used internally in organizations, I can kind of target my attack. I may want to go after test and development because it's less secure. I may want to go after production because that may be a little bit bigger environment. So again, this scan took probably 30 seconds. Went through a large number of IP addresses and was able to pull this information out for me very quickly. So this is how easy it is. These are not rocket science tools. These are kind of mainstream security tools that just about anybody who's going to do this is very knowledgeable with. So when I connect to an Oracle database, I do need 3 pieces of information. I do need to know the IP address, the port number, and the SID or service name. So that is one challenge as an attacker. I do have to know that actually SID. So that's one reason I'm going to try to go after the TS names files, other avenues to actually get that information, because it's a little bit more useful for me. But in one case, I may not know. I may be just scanning your network looking for Oracle databases. So I may have to actually try to figure out what the SID is. And that's actually possible too, because Nmap, again, these tools have been designed to do this, and it will actually brute force that SID. And so what it'll do is it's configured, and it's configured with a file that has a large number of SIDs. And so it'll actually go through and test all these SIDs and service names against the database it's trying to break into. And so Oracle is the default one. Hopefully no one in the call has an Oracle database with the SID ORCL, because that's the default. Most likely you do have other ones, but again, a lot of organizations have common naming. We see like EBS prod is a very common one in most organizations. FinProd for a financial system, you'll see the same name used over and over. We're now talking about a hit or miss situation here. But again, when I run my Nmap, we'll jump back to the Nmap utility, and I ran against one of our test databases here. And again, it's brute force. I'll try to pick one that actually found the information. And so now I ran this against, and this was able to pick the SID out. So again, it tried several hundred SIDs against each database to see if they would work. Where this is problematic for most organizations is I know of very few of all the audits we've ever done. I don't think anybody pulls off the TNS listener logs and actually looks for this type of attack. Very few people do that. They will look at unsuccessful logins and things, but they will, very seldom does anyone ever look at the listener logs unless they're a client of ours, and we've worked with them to get the listener logs into a tool like Splunk so they can actually see this data in Splunk. And then have an alert on this specific attack, because this is one way. If I don't know how to get in, I'm going to do this. So again, this is one area that is often a blind spot, so people would not usually detect. Again, I can get past the network scanning. I can make it very low and slow. And now, looking brute forcing the SID, I would have no problem doing this very noisily, throwing thousands and thousands at a single database, because again, there's no performance issue, there's no impact. I'll get some errors in my listener log files, but no one looks at the listener log files in reality. So now, the assumption is I can now get your SID. So now I've got all the information I need to connect to the database. So now the next question is, how am I going to get into the database? There is one significant advantage of Oracle databases. They are highly secure on the outside. They're like a Tootsie Roll Pop. They're hard and crunchy on the outside. Unfortunately, they're very soft on the inside. But it's very difficult for me to hack an Oracle database if I don't have login credentials. There's only been 2 major security flaws in the last 10 years that impacted the Oracle database that I could actually get into an Oracle database without having login credentials. There's 2 security vulnerabilities that were patched, one in 2012 and the other in 2014, that actually allowed me to get in or compromise the database externally without any login credentials. Hopefully everyone's patched both of those. And if anyone has any questions on those, definitely contact us. We can kind of walk through those and discuss those with you. We've done some presentations on those in the past. But unless I have login credentials, it's very hard to hack an Oracle database. I can crash the Oracle database. There are every other quarter, or maybe every 2 or 3 quarters, there's at least one denial of service. So I can crash the listener. It may not crash the database, and those are denial of service, but I still can't get into the database. I can crash it, I can stop people accessing it, but I can't steal data. So I really need a database account. I need to be able to get in. So the next thing the attacker is going to do is try database credentials. They're going to try to get in a number of ways. And one thing we do internally in Integrigy, from our security assessments, we take the data that we gather during the security assessment and we anonymize it, and we actually track it to find out what database accounts are most often have default passwords. Where is the problem in terms of people trying to get in, and what avenues might work? And so this is kind of the results from that survey. So these are mostly ERP systems, so Oracle Business Suite, PeopleSoft, SAP, of assessments that we've done. And we've kind of tracked over time, where are we finding default passwords? Which accounts have the default passwords? And system are in every single Oracle database. Those are protected by DBAs. They know to change the password, and they're very good at it. So it exists often, but we find the occurrence of default passwords is very, very low. And if we do find a default password on a sister system, it's very often in a brand new installation. The DBAs haven't changed the password yet. However, there are several accounts that we find routinely that people have the default password on DBMS-NMP, and the default password is DBMS-NMP. And we find that in half of the databases we've done the assessments in the last 3 years. That's a very high number. So if I want to get into your Oracle database, and again, the Oracle database is soft on the inside, it's crunchy on the outside, so I have to get in. But once I'm inside, if you haven't applied security patches and things like that, I can very quickly escalate my privileges. I can get into the Oracle database. And so again, this is kind of a chart that shows you some of the key accounts that exist in large numbers of databases that have default passwords. With Oracle 12c and beyond, Oracle is getting much better at this. When I'm installing the database, the passwords are changed. That is not always the case when I'm doing upgrades. I've got older databases out there. Also, when I create databases from scripts, these passwords don't necessarily get changed. Depending on how I create a database, Oracle's gotten much better at it. If you're using the database creation assistance and those tools, it's changing the passwords. However, if DBAs are using scripts to actually create databases, these passwords don't necessarily get changed. So this is still, even though Oracle's gotten better on 12c and 18c on getting these default passwords out of databases, they can still creep up, very much so. And we've actually seen cases where CTX-SYS, instructions in Oracle support documents tell you to change the password back to CTX-SYS to fix a problem and unlock the account. There's multiple cases out there that happens. So Even if you've installed the database well, you've changed the passwords originally, sometimes CTXSys gets reset to CTXSys. We've seen that, especially in Oracle Business Suite environments, that is a step in a number of change notes or Oracle support notes that say change the password back to CTXSys to fix this problem. So how am I actually going to get into these passwords? What am I going to do to actually try to figure it out? And so Nmap has a tool that will actually brute force these. So this will actually go through and attack the database, and Nmap has a list of accounts, and so what it'll do is connect to the database. So again, I now know the information for the connection, and Nmap includes this file that has, actually, let's check on how many are in here, has 687 different accounts that it will attempt to connect to with a username and password. So again, DBMSNP is on this list, so it will now attempt to connect and try the password DBMSNP. And so this is, and again, the attacker needs to find one flaw. They need to find one account that has a known name that they can get into. And then once they're in, then they can start doing some damage. But they need that breachhead into the database. They need at least a connection. Even though DBMSNP only has limited privileges, they can then do privilege escalation, do security vulnerabilities that are unpatched, and actually now compromise the entire database. So again, this is a step approach. As you can see, it's not one step. I just don't do one thing and I get in. I'm doing 4 or 5 things, and then each step, I can find a flaw and I can actually get in. So this one takes a little bit longer to do, so we actually won't show you, but there's a number of things that I can do. Another significant challenge is once I'm in the database, and I may have an account that has limited privileges. Another thing is actually connecting, and occasionally, and this is not as much of an issue with 12c, fortunately, is the user dollar table or the DBA users table has the password hashes. So I can then go in and actually use a tool, and if I go search for Oracle Password Cracker on Google, there's a number of free tools out there that actually let me go in and take the password hashes and crack them. Because now the goal is I'm in the database, I found an account that had a few privileges. It may have had access to user dollar. It may be the apps read account. There may be an account that I've actually been able to find and I've gotten in. And this is what we see happen. We are able to almost track almost every incident investigation we do, find an account with a default password, and then fortunately, in a couple cases, session auditing has been turned on, and we were actually able to track back that this account has a default password, and oh, by the way, there was a login here from the IP, from an IP address that we were able to recognize as the attacker's machine that they were able to compromise. And again, that's how we determined that they were able to get in. So again, getting into these accounts is very important for the attacker. Then the next step is privilege escalation. So once I'm in, I may not have the necessary privileges to do something. I may not be able to steal the data right away. But as you see, everything we've talked about up to this point has nothing to do with critical patch updates. This has nothing to do with security patching. Now I'm going to start talking about security patching. But up to this point, this is just the way Oracle's deployed, how it's configured. Have you properly hardened it? Have you fixed these default passwords? Have you changed the port number to kind of prevent some of the scanning? Do I have protections on my network so people can't even connect to the databases? Now that the attacker has been able to find potentially a database account, gotten into the database, what are they going to do? And what they're going to do is now try to leverage that you're missing security patches. You have a misconfiguration that they may have public permissions. They may have util file dir may be set to star in the database. So the key goal here is I'm in the database. Now I'm going to be able to try to compromise the database. However, in a number of our breach investigations, they actually found accounts that had DBA privileges already. So half the time, privilege escalation is not even an issue. And when we do an incident response, in that the database already had the account they were able to compromise had DBA privileges. We were doing a recent assessment, and there was 2 database accounts that had DBA privileges that were set up as test accounts that had very default passwords. And anyone could have compromised those fairly easily if they had known those accounts existed. And so if we kind of go out to Oracle database, let's kind of show you a couple of examples here. This information is out here. This information is widely known, and they make it easy. So if I just do Oracle database privilege escalation, there are site after site. This is not anything secret. This is well-known information, and it's well published. So when we start talking about going to some of these websites, they give you the code. They walk you through, like, this is what you need to do. This is how you do it. In this case, if I create a procedure within that procedure, again, this one's a little bit more complicated because the account I would have to compromise would have to have create procedure privilege, which is somewhat common. Hopefully, if you've done security well, you haven't granted that out, so at least you block this attack. But again, if I can create this procedure and then execute this other function, I can now grant DBA to myself. And so again, these steps are all well documented out. This isn't rocket science. This is not one of those that you have to be a super sophisticated hacker, genius level person. You just have to go be able to Google and know a little bit about SQL and be able to execute these commands. And now actually I have DBA. So if you haven't patched, and this one is from 2015, let's go to one that's from this vulnerability, I believe, was patched in 2018. So this is a brand new one. So again, very detailed information, how to walk through. And mileage varies on some of these. Some of these are somewhat easy to exploit, some a little bit more complicated to exploit. And again, every quarter there's 3 or 4 new ones that are coming out. So again, someone may be publishing them out. For each quarter, typically 1 vulnerability is published out with this level of detail. Sometimes they're very hard to exploit. So other times they're very easy to exploit. So the level and the success is very dramatically changes by quarter by vulnerability. So again, it may not be super easy to do in 1 quarter, but if they find a database that's unpatched that may be missing 3 or 4 different critical patch updates over a few quarters, it may be much easier for them to get in. But again, this information is published out. They walk you through. They give you the code. They give you the steps. It's very easy to do. Most DBAs think, oh God, I read those and oh my God, it'd be so hard to do. No, there's blog posts all over the place with multiple vulnerabilities to do. So again, few examples of how easy it is actually to exploit some of these. So the next step is once I'm actually within that database and I've compromised that database, now I'm worried about other databases. Okay, I've gotten one database. Now I want to go to another database. One project we did was actually very interesting for a client. It was a large organization. They had 150 Oracle production databases. Our assessment was actually looking at 15 of them. We were doing an audit on their SOX and PCI databases. And this organization extensively used database links. And so one of the things that we ended up doing as part of our assessment is we looked at, okay, how could we use these database links? And a lot of them were public database links, which should never be used. And so from this organization, we were able to compromise a number of different databases, and then we were able to laterally move from database to database using database links. So we were able to compromise one database, then we were able to get into another database and compromise that. Then based on database links from that one, we were able to compromise another database. So the 15 databases we were assessing, we were actually able to compromise 28 other databases by just using database links. So this is just an example of there's a lot of different things that an attacker can do, a lot of techniques they can use, a lot of tools they can use, and then just by using misconfigurations and things that aren't well designed, database links are great. They're very functional. They're very practical. They're very easy to use, but they're also easy to make mistakes by creating public database links. Because remember, database links, vast majority of those configured have the username and password hard-coded in them. And oftentimes they go from a lesser privileged account to a more privileged account. Or they're going from one app's account to another app's account. They may be set up as public. So there's a lot of mistakes you can do here that will allow the attacker, once they're in one database, to potentially now a waterfall effect, go database by database. So almost like dominoes in your organization. So once one database gets compromised, they can actually compromise multiple databases. So now, kind of wrapping up, how do we prevent this? What are some of the techniques to look at these specific hacks? So there's a lot of information out there. Apply security patches, do this hardening. What are some of those key hardening steps? What really do you need to be thinking about, and how do you prevent these types of attacks? And our security recommendation always is, if I can't connect to the database, it's virtually impossible to hack it. So a lot of organizations have very flat networks. The databases are wide open, that they allow many, many people to connect to them. If I can't connect to a database and I'm on your internal network and I've done a phishing attack and I've compromised the user's machine, if I can't connect to the databases, if I have a firewall in front of the data center, if I have invited nodes, if I use Oracle Connection Manager, if I have Oracle Database Firewall enabled, if I'm preventing that direct connection, I have now prevented that attack. It becomes much more complicated for that attacker to get in. They'll have to go some other way. They'll have to actually then compromise your reporting tool or your web application. So it's very important to do that. So anything that you can do to prevent direct database access is very beneficial. One thing that we implement very often for our clients is methods of protecting the databases and doing things like enabling bastion hosts. So for the DBAs to connect to the databases, they don't connect from their desktop. They actually have to use a Windows terminal server or another host that has additional controls around it that then can connect to the databases. So I'm not allowing my flat network from anybody connecting to anywhere. I'm now adding in another layer. I'm putting in either firewalls in front of the data center. I'm doing firewall rules that are protecting the databases specifically just to what is needed to connect, which then forces the attacker to go through another step, potentially having to compromise even a more hardened host like a bastion host or Windows terminal server, that then they would have to compromise and have additional credentials to get into. And so this becomes very important, is how do I prevent, how do I protect the database? And again, once you've limited access to the database, it becomes very, very difficult to hack an Oracle database. Other preventative controls, again, critical patch updates are very important, especially when I'm talking about privilege escalation. Because again, if I can get into a database, the way I really take over the database is then I find a security exploit. Critical patch updates aren't as meaningful about just protecting the database on the network. It's very meaningful within the database, especially on internal. So if I am granting out privileges for individual users to have query-only access to a database, again, they can just go do a Google search and actually escalate their privileges potentially. Another key step is looking for and blocking those default and weak passwords. Again, the incident investigations we do, people are getting in via default and weak passwords. They are finding those accounts that, again, they just have to find one. You have to make sure on an Oracle Business Suite environment that you're keeping all 300 database accounts no default passwords, that when you're creating new accounts, you're not using the welcome one password, that you're periodically checking them. Environments like Oracle Business Suite, when you apply major patches to Oracle Business Suite Business Suite is adding database accounts in the back end with default passwords. That is not documented in the Oracle documentation. It doesn't say, oh, after the fact, we added 4 more database accounts and they all have default passwords. That's not documented. So over time, it's actually very easy to get default passwords. It's also very easy to get them when you do the install. So again, it's a 2-step process. Make sure when you're installing the database that there's no default passwords introduced. When you're creating the application accounts for the first time, that they don't have weak accounts. As an example, we were just looking at a Banner system. Banner is an educational software. Their default password is you pick it. It's you_pick_it. Again, we found a number of cases when we were doing that assessment of you pick it was the default password. So it's very easy to do. And then the final step is making sure databases are hardened and validating. Again, when we're talking about privilege escalation, our patches applied, our database links set up correctly, our profiles set correctly so users aren't allowed to do weak passwords, things like that. So again, it's just diligence on the DBA's team is to make sure that this is being done right. Routinely check for default passwords. Oracle has the DBA users with that password view. That's very limited. So that will only pick up a small subset of potential default passwords on well-known accounts. It won't pick them up everything. So the key is when you're looking for default passwords, you need to be using more advanced command line tools like OraBF, which is Oracle Brute Force, or a tool like our App Sentry, which is checking every single database accounts against large password lists. So when we check a password, we're checking it against over 1 million different passwords. We allow you to add in custom passwords that are maybe unique to your organization. If you can't prevent these attacks, at least have the tools and capability to detect the attack, to see that it's actually happening. Integrigy publishes out our database auditing and logging framework. So if you go to our website, we have a framework that we work through. That's about a 40-page document that works through all these different points and how do you detect these attacks? How do you look for unsuccessful logins? So as an example, the CTX-SYS account should never be logged in. So when we talk about an auditing framework, not only are we auditing every session, every login, every unsuccessful login, we also are adding very specific alerts against those default accounts like CTX-SYS, because it's an indicator. If someone is trying to log in with an unsuccessful login to CTX-SYS, that is a very high probability indicator of a potential attack. That there's no reason. There's no reason that someone should be trying to log in as CTX-SYS, and absolutely no reason that there's an unsuccessful login against that account. So there's about a dozen accounts like that that you should be monitoring for in real time, and if you're seeing those types of attacks, opening up a security incident. If that one alert had been set for most of our clients, they would have been able to detect and stop in real time those attacks against their databases that ended up being successful at the end of the day. That was one item that they could have implemented, and if someone was watching those alerts, they could have stopped those attacks, because no one ever logs into those accounts, and it's very few times that it ever raises actually an alert. And the only time it would raise an alert is if someone's actually trying to go after and attack your database. And as an example, in our framework here, we've actually mapped it to the major compliance standards. So this, we're mapping it out. We're showing you how to do this as a way to do it. And that one of the goals here is to take the audit trails from Oracle, because if you can't prevent these attacks, at least you can detect them. And so there's a number of audit trails within the Oracle database, like the listener log that we talked about before. Funneling all those logs into a centralized logging solution like Splunk, ArcSight, Elasticsearch, you can then alert on that. And so you can have some very powerful and meaningful alerts that will actually detect these attacks when they're happening, and then you can actually stop them from escalating. Especially because once someone gets in, then they can do privilege escalation. Can you stop this before it gets to that point? And yes, you can. And this isn't that complicated. This is actually very doable. We have a lot of organizations moving towards this. They're then now funneling all this data into Splunk, generating some alerts, and they're seeing things on their network they don't like. Too many failed logins. Some of it's just poor operational procedures, but some of it is something's going on, that something is not right. And oftentimes when we turn this on, about 1 out of every 3 cases we turn this on, we're detecting something fairly quickly within a week that says, hey, we're noticing something wrong here. And oftentimes we're finding it back to either a malware on the network that's just doing regular scanning or something like that, that they then have to clean up that they had no idea was on their network. So again, this is just diligence, spending the time and effort doing it, and preventing most database hacks that we see happening is actually not that hard. Just as long as you put the right pieces in place. And there's definitely ways, much more sophisticated ways to do this and attack an Oracle database. But generally, the low-level attacks, the majority of attacks are very preventable and very identifiable with just minimal amount of logging and auditing and alerting capabilities turned on. So that's kind of a brief overview, walking through the different types of attacks, how they happen, and ways to prevent them and detect them. And so we'll open it up to any questions.
I think we have a few here. First question. Does regularly applied CPUs fully protect my databases?
So as we've kind of talked about, CPUs are very important, especially when privilege escalation. However, they're not going to prevent the person trying to connect to the database being able to connect. So again, to properly secure databases, critical patch updates are a very key part of that. They are not the full story. We talk to a lot of organizations that it's all about critical patch updates. Yeah, do we have critical patch updates? And when we really get looking at the databases, they have a lot of misconfigurations, a lot of default passwords, a lot of things that are not set right. They have util file dir set to star that allows that open up to anybody. They have public database links. So again, you need to be doing both. Critical patch updates are very important, very meaningful, but again, just general hardening, configuration, making sure that things are done right, verifying that configuration, and having a database security standard that is meaningful and that you're actually verifying on a periodic basis is almost as important, if not more important, than applying the security patches. Because for us, if you don't have ad hoc users and you've blocked the database access, critical patch updates aren't that important. So as long as I've done my security right, if someone can't connect, they can't exploit those flaws. And so therefore, that becomes less of a risk and less important overall. And if I've spent the time and effort to make sure my security is done right, my network design is done right, I've configured and hardened the database, and I've got auditing turned on, and I'm limiting direct access by ad hoc users, security patches are not as important as they used to be.
Next question. What is exploited most often? Security vulnerabilities or default passwords?
In our experience, it's really default passwords are really exploited. That's how people get in. And multiple cases we've seen where they didn't need to exploit security vulnerabilities because they were able to get into a default account that had DBA privileges. That why go through the effort when I can actually find a default password? We had one case where they were able to get into the database on a lowly privileged account, but from that account, they were able to see all the other accounts because you can always see all the other accounts in an Oracle database, no matter what account it is. They were able to see the other accounts, and then they were able to find a DBA account that they were able to exploit. There was no security vulnerabilities that were exploited. They were able just to use misconfigurations within the database and find an account that they liked, and then were able to get in with DBA privileges. So more likely you're going to be able to stop an attack by making sure that there's no default passwords, you're limiting network access much before you're going to be able to prevent those attacks with critical patch updates.
Next question. From a security perspective, how should I monitor our databases?
Again, a great starting point is the Integrigy auditing and logging framework for databases. You need to be having auditing turned on. And I know a lot of DBAs throw up their hands and say, oh, no, can't have auditing because of performance. If you turn on the minimal set of auditing on around key security events like create session, creation of users, those types of things, you can identify the vast majority of attacks. Again, we don't recommend you turn on auditing on transactional tables, high volume tables, things like that. But auditing sessions, auditing key security events like granting of privileges, those types of things, identify more often than not an attack. But the key part there is taking that information, sending it to a system like Splunk or ArcSight or Elasticsearch, something that then you can get that off the database, and we love to use syslog to do that. Oracle database has native syslog capability, and you can pipe all the session information, all the failed logins and things like that right into a tool like Splunk, create a simple alert in Splunk, and then be notified immediately if there's something that's wrong in terms of security, if there's too many failed logins, if there's people using accounts that they shouldn't be using. Those become very powerful and are able to detect attacks much before anything else.
And one last question here. How can you tell if you have experienced a cyber attack? Our hosting provider experienced a DOS attack recently, but not aware of any attacks on our databases.
Yeah, so again, I think it was a denial of service attack. So unless you have the auditing turned on, it's very hard to know. A lot of organizations are like, oh, no, well, no one's used our credit cards or anything like that. Again, they may not be necessarily looking for credit card information. You may never know. And unless you have the auditing turned on and have that captured and have some reporting capabilities on it, it's very hard to know. With an Oracle database attack, again, I'm not planning for malware. I'm just getting in and grabbing the data. So unless I have some network perimeter controls on that say, oh yeah, somebody just walked out the door with a gigabyte of data, within the database, I don't usually see footprints. Yes, I can identify it, but they're not leaving trails behind. They tend not to create a lot of information. So a lot of the breaches we've dealt with, we were just looking at, they queried these tables. They logged in, they queried these tables, they grabbed the data, they downloaded it. They just did queries. They were able to save it off to flat files, things like that, and they moved on. They weren't like putting back doors into the database. They weren't creating accounts. They weren't creating DBA roles. They weren't doing that because they didn't need to, because they already had access to the data. So it's different than a lot of other systems where you actually have a very detailed forensic audit trail. In some cases you do. Some cases they exploit a security vulnerability and they grant DBA to a certain user and things like that. But a lot of cases there isn't. They connect to the database, they found a weakness, they were able to log in, they were able to query the Social Security HR key table, like HR All People F and ORP Business Suite. They were able to query the entire table, grab all that data, they downloaded it, and they went on their merry way, and then were able to sell it off for $50 a person. That's oftentimes what happens. And so unless you've got those audit trails around who connected from where, when, and you may want, on some key tables, you may want to put in a little bit additional controls, a little additional audits to see who's querying those key tables that may have credit card, may have Social Security numbers, if they're not super high volume tables.
Well, thank you, Steve. I believe that wraps it up for today. I want to thank everybody for taking the time this afternoon to spend an hour with us and listen to Steve's e-webinar here. Be sure to set your calendar for next month, March the 14th. We'll have a educational webinar on EBS and Java security. So again, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of the week.